The Spin-off Podcast Network.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The Spin-off's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, like celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by Spark Lab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about Spark Lab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by The Spin-off with help from Callaghan Innovation, New Zealand's innovation agency. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
Hello and welcome along to the Business Chat for the month. And today we're joined by a new person in the Callaghan team helping to tell the stories of New Zealand businesses, Karen Shearer. G'day, welcome along.
Thank you for having me.
And joined by Maria Slade, who's stepped out of the Callaghan role and into business editor at the Spin-off. Welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, nice to see you in here in this role. Looking through some of the big stories of the month and a few of the things that we've covered through the podcast, I think like the big kind of topical news is we're 125 years since being a pioneering country with women's suffrage. But looking around business, after it did look like we were doing quite well with Theresa Gatting and other very high-profile kind of women in leadership roles, we've gone right backwards to having one of the top NZX 50 leaders being a woman and a very small percent, something like 12-13% of directors being women. Are there signs of hope? What's going on?
Some days you feel like banging your head against a brick wall. I think it was interesting that the Governor-General, Dame Patsy Reddy, who's a lawyer, came out and spoke at the Women of Influence Awards the other night and said that in her generation they put up with a lot of egregious behaviour, that is her word, but they thought that the way to deal with it was to just put their heads down and work hard and eventually things would change. She said, we now know we were wrong, or at the very least too optimistic. And disruption is the only way it's going to happen. And I think that's what's happening with the Me Too movement. Mm. Women are just tired of having to put up with that kind of bad behaviour at whatever end of the scale it is. You know, the rude comments, at one end the sort of pornography on the wall of the workshop, at the other end kind of thing, that sort of thing. Women for too long, I think, have sort of thought, oh, well, you know, boys will be boys, we're just going to have to ignore it or make a joke about it or get past it. Now I think it's swung right round and people are saying, no, that's actually bad behaviour. Actually, that's not acceptable and we need to push forward.
And it's not necessarily being lessons learned quickly if you look at prominent law firms that are finding themselves back in trouble for similar issues to previous high-profile troubles.
Yeah, but isn't it fantastic that actually women now feel empowered and safe enough now to actually speak out against this? I mean, they don't feel that the power imbalance is so bad that they have to put up with it. I mean, I think it's amazing now that women actually, you know, feel that they can expose this. And I'm sure, you know, a lot of men are feeling a lot more careful about what they do. I mean, this is a fairly recent development. I think it's going to have massive implications for all kinds of workplaces.
And there are a lot of men for the point to get through to. I loved Helen Clark's point, her paraphrasing that wonderful quote, that there isn't so much a glass ceiling as just a thick layer of men, or as some people have put it, a layer of thick men.
Yeah, although, I mean, I have to say, working for an organisation like Callaghan, I mean, there are actually some amazingly progressive organisations out there now. I mean, we have a phenomenal percentage of women in senior leadership. We have a women CEO. I mean, I've just been amazed. It's one of the reasons I wanted to work there, is just these incredible women in really senior positions. So, I mean, it really does exist. It's maybe, the law firms and some places are taking a bit to catch up, but there are actually some amazing examples out there now of companies, big and small, that really get it. And I think there's some really good lessons that are being learned now too. I think we are starting, now that those women are getting in those roles, they attract other women, and they are, forcing some change from within. There's this amazing company in Wellington called Techron that's got this fantastic CEO, and she recently spoke about, her experience. And one thing she insisted to the recruiters was, don't bring me, I want a completely balanced portfolio of CVs, gender and so on. And she said that's made, just that one simple little thing has made a massive difference. Like the proportions of women they're hiring are much higher. She's also done things like change the physical environment of the office. That's made a massive difference. So some quite sort of simple things. And I think those lessons, they snowball and word spreads, and, we are making some progress, I think.
We are, and I think you can see that from the percentage of women directors on the top 100 boards now. It has gone up in the time that I've been reporting on this issue over the last decade or so. It was sort of under 10%, and now we're up around the 12, 13, whatever it is now, depending on how you cut it. But part of that came about from the NZX's rule change, the report or explain. So you have to report on the percentage of females at that level and explain why not, if you haven't got them to a certain, the percentage to a certain level. And so they are actively going out there and recruiting from a wider pool of people to try and lift that level. But see, that was affirmative action. Otherwise, it wasn't going to change.
Yeah, and something that we've covered on the podcast before, talking to people like Miranda Burden from Global Women and the like, is this idea of a wave about to break, where if you look at the senior management and senior decision-making roles in all these big NZX 50 companies, there is a very positive spread of female leadership. But it's just at the absolute top that there seems to be this kind of hangover of the old way of doing business, of having just men in leadership positions. And I mean, 49 out of 50 of our top companies being men is kind of, it's staggeringly bad.
Yeah, it's not all about the big companies, though. I mean, there's, New Zealand is a country of small businesses, and I mean, at the smaller end of town, I think there is some real progress being made. We're getting women engineers coming through now. I mean, I think the Auckland University Engineering School's aiming for something like 30% of female students by 2020. I mean, that's not far away. And we're getting those quite prominent women, people like engineers and scientists who are, got fairly high profiles now. And I know amongst startups, we've got a remarkably high percentage of young women compared to globally. It's something like 25%, whereas I think globally it's only 15%. So at that smaller end, the startups and the entrepreneurs, and even in the STEM subjects, which have always been dreadful, really. There's some real signs of hope. I think maybe it is, but a bit of a time issue.
Yeah.
And I think, too, the other thing you have to recognise in traditional New Zealand SME businesses, a lot of them are husband and wife teams. Farming businesses are all pretty much like that. And, women have always played a very active role in running the family business. And that's always been the case. And, a lot of those women would dispute that they don't have that kind of role, because they always have. So we have to remember that.
And farming is a good place to jump into the other big story of the last couple of weeks, which are the Fonterra results. And, a lot has been made of the fact that this, kind of country-supported monopoly that has a lot of kind of effects that the whole country hold on its behalf, such as waterways being spoilt, they're not being included inside emissions trading schemes as a sector. There's a huge kind of like countrywide interest in Fonterra, and they've reported their first ever loss in 17 years of trading.
Yes, it's bad. $196 million loss. It's not good. And a lot of that has come about by bad management. Well, in fact, most of it has. Of course, there was the Danone settlement over the botulism scare. And then, of course, the big write-down on their investment in China, the being mate.
A $405 million write-down.
Yes, indeed. So that's the reason for the loss, and of course it will come round again in this next year because they still make money. They're still selling a lot of milk, so they will make money and it will come round.
And they're still 30% of the world's trade in milk powder, which is extraordinary.
Yeah,
but therein lies the problem, I think.
Well, the world's biggest dairy exporter, that's correct, yeah. I mean, they are making efforts to get more value out of that raw product that they produce. It's all about stream returns. You can have a bucket of milk, but if you just make that into milk powder, you won't make as much profit as if you turn it into butter or cheese or whatever else.
And especially if, as a company and country, you've gone around and helped China and Uruguay scale up their own dairy using the kind of IP and quality that we've built here. So you've brought on a couple of other very large milk powder commodity competitors.
Well, yes, although New Zealand is dairied out, so Fonterra has to expand. It has no choice but to go offshore in terms of expanding the farming operation because you really just can't get any more cows in this country. You can become more productive, but you can't, there's not much more room for growth. And in places like China, you can't supply fresh milk to China because you've got to ship it from New Zealand, and how would you do that? It's just not possible. So that's another reason why they want to expand dairy farming in those kinds of places. So there are good reasons for it. But I think one of Fonterra's fundamental challenge is that it's a cooperative, and so it is owned by its farmers, and it's very difficult for it to raise capital because farmers want the most out of it as possible. And the thing that's sort of kind of counterintuitive that you have to remember with Fonterra is when the milk price goes up, it costs it more because it has to pay its farmers more for its raw product. And now with this bad year, it's going to be even harder for them to invest in just things like coal-fired dairy factories. They've still got some, and they get a lot of flack from environmental pressure groups about that. And ideally, they would like to convert to cleaner forms of fuel, but that costs millions and millions and millions of dollars that they just don't have. So they face a lot of challenges in terms of raising capital to, diversify and improve on those kinds of fronts.
And the people they're competing against, Danone and Nestle, they're the holders of some of the world's most famous household brands. And we're not talking about kind of, small-scale brand building that they would have to set out on. It really is enormous scale that they're having to play at. But most businesses with a $17 billion turnover a year, they'd be able to raise a lot of capital, a lot of debt capital. But the cooperative model, that actually stops them from raising debt capital. How is that?
Because they just can't go out and borrow money like that, or they can't. They have a small shareholder base in terms of shareholders that aren't farmers, and well, in fact, they're not even shareholders; they're unit holders in the Fonterra, the shareholders fund, and that's their really only way of raising external capital, and that gives shareholders access to some of the profit stream from Fonterra, but it's limited. I think I'm right in saying it's worth around about 7% of Fonterra's total value. Don't quote me on that, but it's a small amount anyway. So really then they've only got their farmers, and so the farmers do own shares, but farmers hold on to those shares. They don't flog them to investment banks and that sort of thing. Well, they can't anyway. So they have very limited ways of raising capital, and really they are. There's two competing forces within Fonterra. They're a farmer cooperative that's looking after the interests of their farmers, but at the same time they're a global business out there trying to compete with the likes of Danone, as you rightly point out, and that's always been the tension within the business. And in fact, you sort of end up with two chief executives in a way. Under the old regime, you had Teo Spearings, who was running a global business as far as he was concerned. And then you had your chairman, who we used to call him the head farmer when I was down there doing some comms work for them, because his interest was the farmers. He looked after the farmers. Now we've got the new regime with Monaghan and Hurrell. Perhaps it will be different, but those tensions remain within that organisation.
And the thing we haven't mentioned too, that gets mentioned sort of time and time again, is just the move to value add. I mean, I know it's been said a million times, but I mean, there are enormous opportunities there globally now for value added in the food and beverage sector and the agri-tech sector. I mean, that sector is exploding, and New Zealand is really well placed to take advantage of that, and it would really be fantastic to see Fonterra, taking a bigger slice of that sector.
Well, I saw some really interesting commentary by a rural marketing expert called St. John Craner, and he was saying that one of the structural things that may be holding back useful value add is that because it's it's owned by its 10,500 farmers and they want the best possible return on their milk, that's also the only place that they can get the margin to invest in all the value add products. And so he was suggesting that the model where you broke it into two businesses, a wholesale business that just tried to look after farmer interest and a retail business which had a completely different set of goals, would be the way to get past that. Because if you look at the value add that's been happening, that they've talked about a lot, well, 405 million's gone down the tube at Being Mate, and they've missed Synlait, they've missed A2 Milk, which they've had an opportunity to have taken a really big stake in both early on.
But there's a lot more sophisticated, developments than even that. I mean, with fields like even things like robotics. There's this awesome company in Tauranga called Robotics Plus who've developed these sort of kiwi fruit picking robots, and they're getting massive investment. I mean, those are the kinds of moves. And then in food and beverage, there's amazing developments going on, and that's right up Fonterra's street. There are so many possibilities. I mean, the agri-tech wasn't even really considered a sort of a major sector, even sort of 5 years ago, and now, it's just massive, and it'd be really great to see them doing more work in this area.
Well, there's certainly, there's a lot of talented people and a lot of people that care in the organisation. People love to point out that there's 6,000 people working inside the Fonterra organisation over 100K, and some of them would be well over 100K, and there's only 10,500 farmers. So I'm sure there's a lot of people who could be working on some interesting stuff.
I'm sure
there is some talented people down there, but the basic challenge remains to split the business, as that commentator describes, might make a lot of sense, but you've got to get the farmers to agree to that, and that's your challenge. I couldn't see it happening in the near future.
And moving on to some of the other surprising business news, having been through a bit of the doom and gloom in constant media attention on falling business confidence as part of self-selecting surveys with very low statistical importance, and a general environment of trying to say that we're in a poor economic environment in New Zealand, and then this really surprising GDP figure.
Yeah, I think it shows, actually. It's a bit of a reality check. But I think, we do get a fair bit of commentary coming out of places like the States and so on, and understandably with the anniversary of the Lehman Brothers collapse, you would expect that and the situation. But, actually, I think sometimes we do tend to forget that actually things are ticking along quite nicely here. I know a few of our staff were recently at, Jenny Morell holds an annual, she's a well-known venture capitalist, holds an annual conference down in Queenstown for, some of the country's most exciting sort of startups and venture capitalists and so on. And the mood there was, it was incredibly upbeat. There's some amazing investment going on, and I think, a lot of businesses are actually doing pretty well at the moment. We tend to forget that.
In the thriving ICT sector, especially.
Yeah. And it's not, people talk about the tech bubble and so on. And I think Brian Gaynor wrote a very good column recently in the Herald, sort of comparing the sort of decade before the 87 crash and comparing over the last decade. And it doesn't compare. We're not seeing, 1,000%, increases in share prices. It's not the kind of bubble that people really do fear here anyway.
Yes, it's been interesting reading some of the coverage following the anniversary of the GFC, the global financial crisis, 10 years since the Lehman collapse, which marked the sort of official start, if you like, although the commentators pointed out it was all happening for a good year or two before we reached that stage. And a lot of the commentators are saying, well, have we learned? And it is...
we never learn.
Well, that's kind of what they were saying, that yes, we have learned. There are tighter restrictions on banks. And, our banks weren't that bad, and they're in an even better position now. But overseas in America and so forth, well, you'd have to wonder.
Yeah, and margin trading. Collateralized debt has gone from being subprime mortgage loans to being this incredible grey area with leverage trading on bets of future movements of the value of assets rather than the assets themselves. And there's $1 quadrillion rolling around in there. So there's this enormous, there's a far larger problem than the problem that brought about the last subprime mortgage-led crisis evolving that's being totally ignored at the moment.
Yes, well, I think as various commentators have pointed out, bubbles are human nature. Since the great tulip bubble of the 1700s in the Netherlands, people were paying the price of a house for tulip bulbs. So, it will happen again. There's no doubt about it. But hopefully just not quite with the ferocity of the GFC.
And I have to say, as somebody who probably spent most of my career claiming that that the housing market is about to crash and have been proven wrong time and time and time again, I think we too tend to get a little bit over dramatic about the
I think it's wonderful that we have had more GDP growth in New Zealand than was expected, and that probably is the sign of thriving tourism and some really great export-led tech businesses and the like. But if you do look at the fundamentals. The US has too much debt. They're starting a trade war with the second biggest kind of economic actor in the world, and New Zealand has the most overpriced housing to income levels in the world, and you can't kind of look forward very far and go, well, everything looks good here. Things have a positive ending.
Yeah, but if you look at our debt levels compared to some other countries' debt levels, for example, it's not that bad. Relatively speaking, I don't think we're in as horrific shape as some people like to think we are.
Oh, I'll take that. I'll take any positivity into the day. And jumping out to Apple, so big news with their announcements that always gather a lot of media coverage of their new product lines. But hidden in there was something that people were maybe expecting to see, which was wireless charging, which hasn't been announced yet, but it's now happening here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how many people actually realise there's a fantastic story behind the whole wireless charging phenomenon. There's actually a group of professors at Auckland University who are the world's leading experts in wireless charging. They started something called inductive power transfer many years ago, and that actually became sort of the world standard for wireless power. And out of that, some of their students grew a little company called Power by Proxy. And they developed a way to charge. They embed in batteries a way that you can wirelessly charge appliances and so on. It's an amazing little company, and they got, I think, a bit of publicity when they got bought by Apple about a year ago. I think there was talk at the time that the price might be more than $100 million or so. But it's an amazing success story, and I think there's absolutely no doubt that in the future, wireless power is going to be probably the way we, it's going to become the standard, right? Yeah, I mean it's got.
I'm holding up here a series of wires coming out of my MacBook because you now need not only a wire into the side of your Mac, but also middleware in between other wires to go to other devices. It has to be coming soon. I mean, a company that prides itself on design cannot be happy at all with this.
Bring it on. It is getting crazy. As you say, the number of wires you need these days to just simply operate your day-to-day life.
And that centre of innovation and the work that they're doing, I've heard rumours that Auckland is now kind of the global centre of Apple's wireless charging process.
Well, Power by Proxy they've set up a new office in Auckland. I mean, Apple are, notoriously secretive about exactly, what they do and how they do it for understandable reasons. So they're not obviously saying anything about quite where that's going, but they do have this Auckland office. It's all happening there. Callaghan works with Power by Proxy. We work quite closely with them. We have all the way along, and they're hiring. They're creating many jobs down there, and it's fantastic news. All very highly skilled jobs, and I think there's probably a very bright future for this.
Ah, that's so cool. Can't wait to see how that all comes to pass.
I just have to say,
did
you realise, though, that IKEA is actually selling bedside tables that have charging mats embedded within them this is a thing. I was astounded to read that, and I want one.
Yeah, no, they've been using the IKEA uses the QI technology that actually Power by Proxy was part. That part helped set the standard. That's a global standard at the moment, but I think it'll move a long way past that yet.
Yeah, and for anyone not in the Apple universe who's had wireless charging for years and is laughing.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, which Power by Proxy did play a role in the general global standard that other manufacturers have been using for years.
Yeah, but I mean, it's got huge. It's not just charging a cell phone and so on. I mean, it's got huge industrial applications. I mean, this really is a revolution in the way we charge electricity. Full stop. And I think in 50 years' time, I think we'll be amazed at where this is going.
Cool. And a couple of pod things this month in that the Together Journal story actually broke some news.
Yes, that's right. Together Journal, as far as we can work out, had the first same-sex union on the cover. Other wedding magazines have run stories about same-sex marriages, but to have it on the cover is a new thing. And so New Zealand's Together Journal, which is a very interesting publishing project, when we all think that print media is dying, Together Journal has managed to launch this business specialising in pictures of the sort of more rustic style of weddings, and it has just taken off, and they seem to be doing well. And yes, they broke this ground, which is kind of interesting.
It's kind of interesting that it's ground to break in one sense, but then also Australia, the legislation is so fresh.
Yes, well, there's a wedding magazine over there called White that's come in for controversy for apparently refusing to run stories about same-sex weddings. So they're a bit behind us, I think, across the Tasman.
Yeah, wow.
In a lot of places, actually. It's good to remind yourself, isn't it, just how progressive we actually are here.
I love the fact it's called White. It doesn't sound very very good for the future. And the story of Greta's business success at Together Journal is quite amazing too, in that starting a print media title in a declining environment, and within a year of launch being in more than 200 department stores throughout America. Extraordinary success and really amazing execution.
But boy, she would be the ideal candidate, wouldn't she? I mean, I was just amazed. I mean, her set of skills was a fairly unique set, I think, being so strong and the creative side of things, plus that fantastic IT background. And the thing I thought was amazing about her is, as far as an entrepreneur goes, I mean, she just did it sounds to me like she just did everything right, everything you should do. She went to the Ice House, she got a great mentor, she's social media friendly, she's got this gift of, user-generated content. There's another, sort of key lesson that all entrepreneurs, say yes and then make it happen. I mean, she just seems to have done everything. She's either had very good advice or she's very lucky or both.
She's very bright, a great executor. And I love this thing that she identified somewhere where she gets user-generated content. But it's like the most expensive thing most people do in their lives outside of buying an asset. And so they've spent, $30K, maybe a lot upwards getting these photos. And then the magazine gets to run them. Great.
Yeah, it's really smart.
It's a great model. It reminded me a little bit of the Trends magazine, which was started off, many years ago on a kind of a similar model and has also done, incredibly well and really well globally as well.
And another chat that I really enjoyed this month was with Lisa Tauma, who was the producer at Fresh TV and Coconut, and just really fascinating to kind of chat through telling Pacifica-centric stories in mainstream media when it's always been popped into kind of funny around the edges programming slots and had to then be content for Pacifica community, but not to alienate any person who happened to be watching TV at 10 o'clock in the morning. And so walking that kind of compromise line, and then through the internet being able to, and through brave programming decisions or more reasonable programming decisions, being able to move into telling like stories in the voice of and for the community. So such a cool story.
I thought she was smart to identify the niche, for want of a better way of describing it, because
12% of the country.
It's quite a large niche, but that's it. No one was servicing that population, and that is where the growth in our population is. It's Pacifica groups are a very young population, and so there's a lot of growth there. And so as a business owner, why would you not want to be targeting that kind of community. So from that point of view, I thought she was very smart. I wondered, though, what her actual business model is in terms of making money. I mean, she's getting New Zealand On Air funding, great, but yeah, she didn't sort of expand on exactly how she's making her money.
Yeah, the Coconut is it's fantastic in that it isn't all filled with advertisements, which is like the online portal where they post a bunch of stories and make streams of content particularly for. And yeah, so I think there is a New Zealand On Air component there. But when you're talking about kind of 12% of the population, you can
it's going to be 20% by 2038.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you could go a long time of picking up the paper and turning on the news and not know that Auckland was the biggest Pacifica city in the world. So yeah, it's a good thing, I think, for the NZ On Air to be working in.
And do you know what I really loved about her? I loved her. It's not particularly original, but I still loved it. Her definition of success. I loved the way she said, success is, speaking of money, it's not doing what your parents want. It's doing what makes you happy. I thought that was just like a mantra for kind of entrepreneurs. Really, I thought that was so cool.
That's so magic. Yeah, and yeah, let's leave it on that lovely note. So thank you so much, Karen Shearer from Callaghan Innovation and Maria Slade from The Spinoff.
Thank you.
Thank you to
Thank you.
Alice Webb-Liddell for producing, and thank you very much for having us on the Business Chat.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound. And brought to you by The Spinoff and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spinoff Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spinoff Podcast Network.